Hello, this is the Urban Omnist, and once again we're going to be talking about how Omnism actually works on a real practical level. Now, a lot of times when you read various articles about Omnism, you'll find people saying things like, well, Omnists believe in certain parts of different religions, or certain parts of all religions, but they obviously can't really believe in all religions because all religions disagree on a fundamental level. Now, I've thought about that a lot, and I certainly understand why many people will say that about Omnism, and why even a lot of Omnists will say that. But from my perspective, it isn't really true. And perhaps that's just the way I tend to look at religions. See, for me, all religions are really essentially saying the same thing. And I know I've talked about this before, but at their very base, religions are all saying, be a good person. Treat your fellow man in a certain way. Treat yourself in a certain way. Remember my golden rule from my morality video? Don't be a douche. That's really about it. That's really the whole thing. To me, a lot of what we run into, one religion and another religion, in the way they disagree, really has significantly more to do with their culture than with the fundamentals of that religion. Because no matter what, when you're trying to bring a message to people and trying to teach them how to live and trying to teach them how to be, you're going to be doing it through their culture. The Bible, for instance, is a really interesting example of that. In my opinion, there's really two different kinds of morality within the Bible. There's the morality that's demonstrated in the Ten Commandments, which all comes down to, again, don't be a douche. Don't do bad things to people. Don't steal from people. Don't commit adultery. Don't bear false witness. Don't do bad stuff. Love your neighbor as yourself, etc., etc. A lot of the other things that often wind up getting bantered around really have significantly more to do with cultural bias. For instance, the Jews, who admittedly have virtually made an entire meaning out of the law itself, consider themselves to have 613 commandments, which are spread all throughout the Torah. But in my opinion, many of those commandments really have more to do with two things. Number one, keeping them separate, which is very big to the Jews. They like to consider themselves separate. It makes them feel different in a good way. It's why they don't wear mixed linens. It wasn't because there was anything fundamentally wrong with wearing mixed linens. They very simply didn't want to do what the pagans were doing. It's part of the reason they dress in a certain way. They do certain things. They do things that make themselves different, in much the same way that the Amish do. Some people will think that Amish actually believe that electricity is evil. They don't think it's evil. They do try to live a life that is separate from the rest of the world, and that's part of their way of doing it. It doesn't have anything to do with thinking that those specific things that they do and don't do, they try not to drive cars and not use computers and not use telephones. These things aren't fundamentally wrong, not in an evil way. It's just things they don't do so that they can feel separate from the world and in a certain way holy and a certain way special. It's also why they talk to each other in sort of this King James sort of way. It has nothing to do with thinking that people at Bible times actually spoke that way. It's simply something that makes them feel more holy. And the same way the Jews do a lot of things to make themselves feel more Jewish. There's also a lot of commandments in the Bible and in many holy books which will probably feel arbitrary to people, and they're not. There's nothing arbitrary at all about them. Why are we told not to eat pork in the Bible? Did God just sort of decide that pigs were a bad thing? No, there were a lot of kinds of meats that were actually very dangerous to eat. Pork being a particularly dangerous one because it was hard to cook correctly. If you didn't cook it enough, it was very easy to get diseases from the meat. It was a very unclean animal. That's really what clean and unclean animals meant. It meant dangerous and undangerous animals, animals that could hurt you if they weren't cooked enough. Obviously, those are things that don't necessarily matter today. The Jews continue that tradition because, again, It is part of what makes them Jews, but it isn't that eating meat is somehow evil or disdainful to God. It's very simply a matter of practicality. Muhammad, for instance, told people not to shave their beards. Now, was it because there was anything evil about shaving your beard? Of course not. It was just that in the time of Muhammad, people would shave their beards with their swords and daggers, which they could only sharpen so much. They would nick themselves all the time, and they would get all kinds of infections. And so he told them to stop shaving their beards. A lot of what we now call law were really very practical ways of very simply looking at the world, showing us not to do things that could hurt ourselves. There's obviously a commandment that you should put a certain amount of a ledge around your roof, which probably wouldn't make any sense to anyone these days. But back in those times, they had flat roofs. People liked to party up there, and they didn't want people falling off, and so they made a rule about that. And it's very important to make those distinctions and realize what things from a religion are a true core value to that religion and what is merely a reflection of that culture. And to me, when you do that, when you take a bird's eye view of all these religions, you really do find that what is being said at its very core is essentially identical, once you weed through all the cultural biases. Needless to say, that's only one way of looking at it, and all of you out there watching this and considering Omnism will have to come to your own view, but that's my own humble opinion. I'll see you next time here on the Urban Omnist. Well, from my perspective, that isn't actually true. Because if I hold my hands like this long enough, things will just start to make sense to you. A little ball of light will form between them. Heaven help me if I ever have a real show and my whole crew is just like, oh God, not again. More sake. I need to buy some sake just so I can say that. Even though I would have no way to tell you how that is. So what you're going to have to do is link up to my brain and just figure it out. Hello, this is the Urban Omnist. I've decided that I might actually get a much bigger audience if I was utterly, completely inebriated every time I came on. So from now on, you will not find me without some kind of a drink in my hand, or at least some form of liquid libation, which will hopefully lead to some form of inebriation, which will therefore lead to perhaps not a more accurate video, but certainly a funnier one. I completely forgot what I was going to say. And remember guys, none of this works without you. So, subscribe to our channel, like us on Facebook and Twitter, and above all, don't forget to send me those questions.